Jasmine Crockett sat motionless at the congressional hearing, the bright lights catching the emerald green suit of the freshman Texas Congresswoman as she listened to the furious tirade. Across the room, Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General, stood red-faced, her finger pointing directly at Crockett, voice rising to a fever pitch that echoed through the chamber. "You have no right to question my integrity," Bondi shouted, the microphone amplifying her rage as committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. What happened next shocked everyone in the room. Instead of firing back with equal fury, Crockett calmly adjusted her microphone, took a slow sip of water, and delivered a response so measured and devastating that within hours, the video would rack up millions of views and become the defining moment of the entire hearing. Before diving into this incredible showdown, hit the like button and subscribe so you won't miss our breaking political analysis that cuts through the noise. The hearing room buzzed with tension as the C-SPAN cameras panned across the packed chamber. Today's Oversight Committee meeting had drawn unusual attention with representatives from both parties, ready to clash over the controversial federal funding bill. Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General known for her aggressive prosecutorial style, sat confidently at the witness table, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her navy blue blazer creating a commanding presence. The Republicans had called her as their star witness, hoping her testimony would derail the Democrats' agenda. On the committee desk, Jasmine Crockett, the freshman Democrat from Texas, reviewed her notes carefully. At 42, the former civil rights attorney had quickly established herself as a rising star in the party. Articulate, sharp, and unafraid to challenge political veterans, her emerald green suit stood out against the dark wood paneling of the hearing room, her braided hair pulled back in a professional style that framed her focused expression. "The committee will come to order," announced Chairman James Lankford, his gavel echoing through the chamber. "Today, we're examining the allocation of federal resources in the proposed infrastructure package." The routine opening statements proceeded predictably until Bondi began her testimony, her voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding courtrooms. "This bill is nothing short of fiscal negligence," Bondi declared, looking directly at the Democratic side of the committee. "The earmarks for urban development are bloated handouts designed to reward political allies rather than address actual infrastructure needs." Several Republican members nodded approvingly as she continued. "When I was Attorney General, I prosecuted corrupt schemes with less blatant misappropriation than what I see in this legislation." Camera operators zoomed in on committee members' reactions, Republicans smiling in agreement, Democrats scribbling notes furiously, and Chairman Lankford looking pleased as Bondi laid out her case against the bill, methodically criticizing its funding allocations. Asterisk, the American people deserve transparency, not political theater disguised as infrastructure investment, she concluded, settling back in her chair with the satisfied look of someone who just delivered a knockout punch. As question time began, senior committee members took their turns. The partisan divide immediately apparent, Republicans lobbing softball questions, allowing Bondi to expand her criticisms, Democrats attempting to challenge her assertions only to be met with dismissive rebuttals. The tension in the room steadily increased with each exchange, the political theater unfolding exactly as expected until Chairman Lankford announced, "The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Miss Crockett, for 5 minutes of questioning." A subtle shift occurred as Crockett leaned toward her microphone. Those familiar with her work in the Texas legislature and her record as a civil rights attorney straightened in their seats, anticipating what might come next. Bondi's expression remained confident but attentive. She knew Crockett's reputation for precise, penetrating questions that often left witnesses scrambling. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Crockett began, her voice measured and professional. "Miss Bondi, I appreciate your attendance today." She paused, reviewing a document in front of her. "Before we discuss the current bill, I'd like to clarify some statements you made about your experience with federal funding oversight during your time as Florida's Attorney General. Bondi nodded. Of course, Congresswoman. What happened next would transform a routine committee hearing into a viral moment that would dominate news cycles for days. Crockett looked directly at Bondi, her expression neutral but focused. Miss Bondi, you stated earlier that you have extensive experience identifying misappropriation of federal funds. Could you elaborate on your handling of the $300,000 in federal pandemic relief that was allocated to Florida's small businesses but was instead used for an unrelated project in 2021? A momentary flash of surprise crossed Bondi's face before she composed herself. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Congresswoman. I left office in 2019, well before any pandemic relief funds were distributed. I'm aware of your tenure dates, Crockett replied calmly. I'm referring to the consulting work your firm did for the state after you left office, specifically advising on federal fund allocations during which this particular irregularity occurred. The room grew quieter as committee members sensed the exchange taking an unexpected turn. Bondi's posture stiffened slightly. My firm provided general compliance guidance. We weren't responsible for specific allocation decisions, she said defensively. Crockett nodded, then held up a document. I have here an email from October 2021 in which you personally signed off on the reallocation of those funds from small business relief to the Palmetto Highway project, the same project, coincidentally, where your firm also represented one of the primary contractors. Would you like to revise your previous statement about your involvement? Cameras captured the moment perfectly, Bondi's eyes widening, her jaw tightening as she realized the direction of Crockett's questioning. The room fell silent. That's a mischaracterization of a complex situation, Bondi replied, her voice rising. Those funds were redirected through proper channels after the small business program was fully satisfied. Crockett remained composed. That's interesting. Because the Florida Small Business Association filed a formal complaint stating they received only 60% of their allocated funds before the money was redirected. She held up another document. I have their filing here. Would you care to explain the discrepancy? The questioning continued, with Crockett methodically presenting evidence contradicting Bondi's earlier testimony. With each exchange, Bondi's responses grew more tense, her usual composure showing cracks as Crockett refused to relent. Finally, after Crockett presented a particularly damaging document showing potential conflicts of interest in Bondi's consulting work, the former Attorney General's composure shattered completely. Rising halfway from her chair, face flushed, Bondi's voice escalated to a shout that caused microphone feedback. This is absolutely outrageous, she yelled, pointing directly at Crockett. You're taking everything out of context to create a political spectacle. You have no right to question my integrity with these cherry-picked documents when you've been in Congress barely a year. Gasps rippled through the room. Several committee members looked stunned at the breach of decorum. Langford reached for his gavel, but before he could intervene, Bondi continued. You Democrats always do this whist fact, manipulate evidence, all for your political theater. I've served Florida for years while you're just looking for your viral moment. This is disgraceful. Her voice echoed through the chamber as she gestured wildly, while Crockett sat perfectly still, expression unchanged. The cameras captured everything, Bondi losing control, while Crockett remained poised. When Bondi finally paused for breath, the room went silent. All eyes turned to Crockett, waiting for an explosive response. Instead came the moment that would be shared millions of times. Calmly, Crockett adjusted her microphone, took a slow sip of water, and looked directly at Bondi. The room held its breath. Miss Bondi, she said quietly, I didn't come here to question your integrity. Your own emails did that for me. The tension was electric. Bondi glared, still breathing heavily, while Crockett continued without raising her voice. "The American people deserve accountability, Miss Bondi. Not shouting, not deflection, just simple accountability." Bondi attempted to interrupt, but Crockett spoke firmly. "I haven't finished my time, Miss Bondi, and I'd appreciate the same professional courtesy I extended during your testimony." The rebuke landed cleanly, delivered with quiet authority. Crockett handed a folder of documents to a staff member. "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter these documents into the record." "So ordered," Langford replied, subdued. Turning back to Bondi, Crockett continued, "You've criticized this bill for fiscal irresponsibility, while your own record shows concerning patterns the public should be aware of." She lifted another document. "I have here the internal audit from the Florida State Comptroller's Office dated January 2022 that flags this transaction as procedurally irregular and recommends further review. Were you aware this audit existed?" The color drained from Bondi's face. I haven't seen that document." "That's unfortunate," Crockett replied, still steady. "Because it was sent to your office for response 3 times between February and April 2022. Each request went unanswered." Cameras zoomed in on Bondi's expression as panic replaced anger. She looked toward the Republican side for help, but found only discomfort. Crockett pressed on. "Miss Bondi, I'm not here to attack you personally. But when you come before Congress making claims about proper allocation of federal funds while evidence suggests you may have engaged in the very behavior you're criticizing, that creates a credibility problem." The room was silent. Phones were raised, recording every word. The people of Florida and all Americans deserve to know that those entrusted with public funds are using them as intended, not redirecting them to benefit connected contractors, not ignoring official audits, and certainly not coming before Congress criticizing others while hoping no one notices this history. The contrast was unmistakable. Bondi's emotional outburst versus Crockett's factual precision. One relied on volume, the other on evidence. And everyone could see which approach prevailed. "My time is almost up," Crockett noted, glancing at the clock. "So, I'll end with this. Miss Bondi, you mentioned my limited time in Congress, as if it somehow invalidates my questions. But the length of my service isn't what matters here. What matters is that when I ask questions in this chamber, I make sure they're backed by facts and evidence." She arranged her papers neatly before delivering her final point. "Perhaps instead of questioning my experience or shouting about your integrity, you could simply address the documented discrepancies in your testimony. That's all I'm asking for. Straightforward answers to straightforward questions." Crockett looked up at the chairman. "I yield back the remainder of my time." The room remained in stunned silence. Chairman Langford seemed momentarily unsure how to proceed before clearing his throat. The gentlewoman yields back. We'll take a 10-minute recess before continuing." As the gavel came down, the spell broke. The hearing room erupted with noise. Journalists rushing out to file stories, spectators buzzing with animated conversation, staff members huddling with their representatives. At the witness table, Bondi sat motionless, staring at her notes, the fight visibly gone from her posture. Across the room, Crockett gathered her documents calmly, accepting a note from her staff assistant without any outward display of triumph. She had not raised her voice once, had not matched Bondi's emotional display, and had emerged unquestionably victorious in the exchange. Outside the hearing room, journalists were already filing their reports. Remarkable scene in today's hearing. One reporter spoke into her camera. Former Florida Ag Pam Bondi lost her composure completely, shouting at Congresswoman Crockett, responded with what can only be described as ice-cold precision. We're told clips of the exchange are already spreading across social media. Indeed, even before the hearing reconvened, the first clips were being shared and commented on. Crockett was beginning to trend along with Bondi meltdown. The political impact of the exchange was just beginning to take shape. But one thing was already clear. In the battle of styles, between Bondi's fury and Crockett's composure, the latter had won decisively. The 10-minute recess extended to 20 as committee staff huddled with members, discussing how to proceed after the unexpected confrontation. When the hearing finally resumed, Bondi's demeanor had completely changed. Subdued, careful, and notably less combative when responding to further questions. For her part, Crockett participated in the remainder of the hearing with the same professional demeanor she displayed throughout, giving no indication that anything extraordinary had occurred. But everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed a significant political moment, one that would follow both women long after the hearing concluded. Within hours, video clips of the exchange between Pam Bondi and Jasmine Crockett spread across the internet like wildfire. What had begun as a routine congressional hearing had transformed into a viral sensation that captured the nation's attention. Social media platforms were flooded with snippets of the confrontation, each highlighting the dramatic contrast. Bondi's explosive anger versus Crockett's unflappable calm. On Twitter, the hashtags bar.com Crockett and Bondi meltdown climbed rapidly, reaching the top trending positions by early evening. Short clips focusing on Crockett's most devastating responses garnered millions of views, with users adding captions like, "Watch a masterclass in keeping your cool. This is how you handle someone trying to intimidate you." Bondi thought she could steamroll Crockett with volume and anger, tweeted a political commentator with over 2 million followers. Instead, she walked face first into a buzzsaw of facts and receipts. Game over. The post was shared over 50,000 times within hours. Meanwhile, major news networks scrambled to cover the unexpected drama. CNN featured the exchange prominently with a panel analyzing both the substance of Crockett's questions and the striking difference in demeanor. "What we witnessed today was a perfect example of preparation beating emotion," noted a political analyst. Congresswoman Crockett came armed with documents, specific questions, and unshakable composure. Former Ag Bondi was clearly caught off guard and reacted emotionally rather than substantively. Fox News took a different angle, with several commentators suggesting Crockett had ambushed Bondi unfairly. These were clearly gotcha questions designed to provoke a reaction, argued one host. However, even conservative analysts had to acknowledge the optics of the exchange. Regardless of the substance, the visuals here are problematic, admitted a Republican strategist. Shouting while your opponent remains calm never plays well with the public. MSNBC ran extended clips of the exchange with hosts praising Crockett's approach. "This is how oversight is supposed to work," declared one anchor. Specific questions backed by evidence delivered without personal attacks or grandstanding. The viral moment extended beyond political circles. Entertainment sites posted the clips with headlines like "Congressional Clapback." "Watch this freshman rep school a veteran politician without breaking a sweat." Even sports commentators weighed in, with one popular ESPN personality tweeting, "Crockett just gave a masterclass in playing the long game. Let your opponent lose their cool while you stick to your game plan." That's championship mentality. By nightfall, late-night comedy shows were already incorporating the exchange into their monologues. "Pam Bondi learned a valuable lesson today," joked one host. "When you come at the queen, you best not miss, or at least bring an indoor voice." The public reaction was similarly decisive. Comment sections across platforms overwhelmingly favored Crockett's approach, with users from across the political spectrum acknowledging the effectiveness of her measured response to Bondi's outburst. "I don't always agree with Democrats," wrote one commenter identifying as conservative, "but I respect someone who can make their case without screaming. Crockett earned my respect today, regardless of politics." Another user commented, "My daughter wants to be a lawyer, and I'm making her watch this clip. This is how you stand your ground with facts, evidence, and unshakable composure. As clips continued to circulate, journalists began digging deeper into the substance of Crockett's questions. Several Florida news outlets published stories examining the Pandemic Relief Fund reallocation that Crockett had highlighted, with headlines asking, was Bondi's firm really involved in redirecting small business relief funds? The Jacksonville Times-Union ran a feature confirming many of Crockett's assertions, reporting that internal emails did show Bondi's consulting firm had advised on the fund reallocation, while also representing contractors who benefited from the decision. The paper also verified the existence of the comptroller's audit that Crockett had referenced. By the following morning, the story had evolved from a viral moment to a substantive political story. Morning shows featured the exchange prominently, with hosts noting that beyond the theater of the confrontation, Crockett had raised serious questions about Bondi's past actions that remained largely unanswered. What makes this different from typical political theater? Explained a political scientist on a morning news program. Is that beneath the dramatic confrontation are actual documents, emails, and an official audit that raise legitimate questions about potential conflicts of interest. This isn't just about who kept their cool. It's about accountability. For both women, the exchange had immediate consequences. Crockett's social media following exploded overnight, with her Twitter account gaining over 200,000 new followers in less than 24 hours. Her office reported being flooded with messages of support from across the country, including many from people who identified as independents or moderate Republicans impressed by her professionalism. Progressive organizations quickly capitalized on the moment, with several launching fundraising campaigns featuring the clip and slogans like "Support representatives who fight with facts, not volume." Crockett's campaign reported a surge in small dollar donations from all 50 states. For Bondi, the fallout was less positive. Several organizations that had booked her for speaking engagements quietly removed her from their upcoming events. Republican strategists publicly advised other witnesses appearing before congressional committees to learn from Bondi's mistake and maintain composure regardless of questioning. More concerning for Bondi were the investigative stories now emerging about the pandemic fund reallocation. The Tampa Bay Times announced it was launching a full investigation into the matter, while the Florida Small Business Association issued a statement thanking Congresswoman Crockett for bringing to light issues our members have been raising for over a year. Bondi's initial response to the viral moment came via a tour statement released through her spokesperson. Yesterday's hearing was a partisan ambush designed to distract from the serious flaws in the Democrats' spending bill. We stand by Miss Bondi's record of service to Florida, and will address any mischaracterizations of her post-govern consulting work at the appropriate time. The statement did little to stem the tide of public reaction, with many commentators noting that it failed to address any of the specific allegations Crockett had raised with documentation. By midday, Bondi had scheduled an appearance on a friendly cable news program, clearly hoping to reset the narrative. But the damage control effort faced an uphill battle against the powerful visual of her shouting, while Crockett remained composed. A contrast that continued to dominate social media and news coverage. For her part, Crockett maintained her measured approach. When asked about the exchange by reporters as she left a committee meeting the following day, she simply stated, "Yesterday's hearing was about ensuring proper oversight of federal funds. That remains my focus regardless of how witnesses respond to factual questions." The understated response only enhanced her growing reputation for unflappable professionalism. A stark contrast to the emotional outbursts that had come to characterize much of contemporary political discourse. As the story continued to develop, political analysts from across the spectrum agreed on one thing. The exchange between Bondi and Crockett had resonated because it represented something increasingly rare in American politics. A confrontation where facts and composure prevailed over volume and emotion. For millions of Americans weary of shouting matches masquerading as political debate. Crockett's calm dismantling of Bondi's testimony offered something surprisingly refreshing. A reminder that in the arena of public service, how you make your case can matter just as much as what you're arguing for. And as the video views continued to climb, reaching over 50 million across platforms within 48 hours, it became clear that Crockett's composed response to Bondi's shouting had struck a chord that transcended partisan politics, tapping into a widespread hunger for more substantive, fact-based political discourse. The moment had gone beyond viral. It had become a cultural touchstone referenced in conversations about professionalism, debate tactics, and the changing face of political communication in America. 3 days after the explosive hearing, the aftershocks continued to reverberate through Washington and beyond. What had begun as a routine oversight committee meeting had transformed into a defining political moment with implications far beyond the original subject matter. For Jasmine Crockett, the impact was immediate and substantial. Her office was flooded with interview requests from major publications and networks. Time magazine reached out about featuring her in an upcoming issue on New Voices in Congress. Several talk shows extended invitations, eager to have her discuss not just the confrontation with Bondi, but her broader legislative agenda and background. More significantly, senior Democratic leadership took notice. Sources within the party revealed that Crockett had received calls from several high-ranking Democrats, including committee chairs and party leaders impressed by her effectiveness. Discussions about giving her more prominent committee assignments and speaking roles were reportedly underway. Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated exactly the kind of focused oversight we need, the House Democratic leader told reporters when asked about the viral exchange. She came prepared, stuck to the facts, and didn't get drawn into personal attacks even when provoked. That's the standard we should all aspire to. For Crockett personally, the attention brought both opportunities and challenges. Her staff reported being overwhelmed by the volume of messages and calls, requiring additional personnel to manage the sudden influx. Security around her Capitol Hill office was temporarily increased after a small but concerning number of threatening messages from people angered by her questioning of Bondi. Despite these pressures, Crockett maintained the same measured approach that had characterized her during the hearing. She continued attending committee meetings and floor votes, politely declining most interview requests to focus on her legislative work. The Congresswoman appreciates the interest in last week's hearing, her communications director stated, but believes actions speak louder than television appearances. This restraint only enhanced her growing reputation. Crockett is playing this exactly right, noted a veteran political consultant. She's letting the work speak for itself rather than trying to capitalize on 15 minutes of fame. That suggests someone thinking about a long-term career in public service, not just viral moments. For Pam Bondi, the aftermath proved more challenging. Despite multiple attempts to reframe the narrative through friendly media appearances, the images of her shouting while Crockett remained composed continued to dominate coverage. More damaging were the investigative stories now examining her consulting work in Florida. The Tampa Bay Times published a detailed investigation, confirming many of Crockett's assertions about the Pandemic Relief Fund reallocation. The article revealed that Bondi's firm had indeed advised state officials on redirecting funds, initially designated for small businesses, to infrastructure projects, including ones involving clients of her firm. Internal emails obtained through public records requests showed Bondi had been personally involved in these discussions, contradicting her testimony before the committee. Following this reporting, 2 organizations announced they were canceling upcoming events featuring Bondi, citing scheduling conflicts but privately acknowledging the controversy. More concerning for Bondi was a statement from the Florida Bar Association noting they had received ethics complaints regarding potential conflicts of interest in her post-govern consulting work. Bondi's allies attempted to mount a defense, arguing she was being unfairly targeted for political reasons. Several conservative commentators, suggested the entire episode had been a setup designed to embarrass her and distract from the Democrats' spending bill. "This is classic misdirection," claimed one Fox News host. "They don't want to talk about the billions in wasteful spending, so they attack the messenger." However, Lee's defenses struggled to gain traction against the documented evidence. Crockett had presented, and the subsequent journalistic investigations confirming those documents' authenticity. Even some conservative outlets acknowledged the substantive issues raised deserved serious consideration beyond partisan positioning. Beyond the immediate political fallout for both women, the incident sparked broader discussions about changing standards in public discourse. Opinion pieces analyzed the Crockett method versus the Bondi approach, with writers across the political spectrum largely favoring the former's evidence-based calm over the latter's emotional appeals. "There's a lesson here for politicians of all stripes," wrote a columnist for The Atlantic. "In an era when everyone has a camera and every outburst can be endlessly replayed, maintaining composure isn't just about decorum. It's strategic." Crockett understood this. Bondi didn't. Psychology experts weighed in as well, noting how Crockett's response represented effective techniques for dealing with confrontation by remaining calm while her opponent became emotional. Congresswoman Crockett maintained credibility with observers, explained a behavioral psychologist in a widely shared analysis. "It's a technique that works not just in politics, but in any high-stakes negotiation or confrontation." In classrooms across the country, teachers reported using clips from the exchange in lessons on debate, public speaking, and conflict resolution. A high school debate coach in Michigan told a local newspaper, "I've had my team study this exchange as a perfect example of how preparation and composure trump volume and emotion. It's a masterclass in effective persuasion." Law professors similarly incorporated the clips into their courses. "I'm using this in my trial advocacy class to demonstrate how to respond when opposing counsel attempts to rattle you," noted a professor at Georgetown Law. Crockett's technique of pausing, taking a sip of water, and responding factually rather than emotionally is exactly what we try to teach future litigators. By the end of the week, the hearing had generated something rare in contemporary politics: a nearly unanimous consensus about effective communication. Polls showed that regardless of political affiliation, Americans overwhelmingly viewed Crockett's approach more favorably than Bondi, with 76% of respondents saying they were more likely to trust someone who remains calm under pressure than someone who shows passionate emotion. For Crockett, this translated into tangible political capital. Her fundraising numbers for the quarter jumped significantly, with small-dollar donations flowing in from across the country. More importantly, her colleagues in Congress began seeking her input on messaging strategies and committee approaches. "There's a before and after to Jasmine Crockett's career," observed a senior Democratic strategist. "Before this hearing, she was a promising freshman finding her footing. After it, she's a communications powerhouse who's demonstrated she can be devastatingly effective, without resorting to the kind of theatrics that turn off moderate voters." For Bondi, the consensus was equally clear, but far less positive. Republican strategists privately acknowledged her approach had backfired dramatically, creating not just a personal embarrassment, but potentially damaging the party's broader messaging on government spending and accountability. "The problem isn't just that she lost her cool," explained a Republican consultant speaking on condition of anonymity. "It's that she created a perfect visual metaphor for everything people dislike about political discourse: shouting, finger-pointing, and personal attacks instead of substantive engagement with the issues." As the immediate furor began to fade, the longer-term impact of the exchange came into focus. Beyond the personal consequences for both women, the incident had provided a rare point of consensus in America's divided political landscape, a shared recognition that facts delivered calmly ultimately carry more weight than emotion delivered loudly in an environment often characterized by its heat rather than its light. This lesson resonated across partisan lines. And while the specific policy issues debated in that hearing room would eventually fade from public memory, the image of Crockett's composed response to Bondi's outburst would remain, a powerful reminder that how we engage matters just as much as what we're fighting for. 2 weeks after the hearing that transformed both their public images, Jasmine Crockett and Pam Bondi were experiencing dramatically different trajectories in their professional lives. For Crockett, the viral moment had translated into substantial political capital. Democratic leadership had appointed her to a special task force on government accountability, a high-profile assignment rarely given to first-term representatives. Her office reported that senior members of Congress who had previously barely acknowledged her now regularly sought her input on messaging and strategy. What Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated wasn't just good optics. It was effective oversight, noted the House Majority Leader during a press conference. She showed how proper preparation and a focus on facts rather than theatrics can cut through noise and get to truth. Crockett had leveraged her newfound prominence strategically, focusing on substantive legislation rather than media appearances. She introduced a bill strengthening disclosure requirements for former government officials working as consultants, legislation that quickly gained co-sponsors from both parties. The Transparency and Public Service Act isn't about any individual, Crockett explained during the bill's introduction. It's about ensuring that when people leave government service to work in the private sector, their new roles don't create conflicts with their previous responsibilities to the American people. The measured approach continued to enhance her standing. A profile in the Washington Post described her as bringing a civil rights attorney's precision and a new generation's composure to the often overheated chambers of Congress. The article noted how she had turned down lucrative book deals and paid speaking engagements to focus on her congressional duties. Her effectiveness extended beyond the viral moment. During subsequent committee hearings, colleagues and observers noted how witnesses now approached her questioning with particular care, clearly wary of facing the same methodical dismantling Bondi had experienced. This reputation for thoroughness made her more effective even when she wasn't speaking. When Crockett starts reviewing her notes, you can feel the tension in the room rise, a committee staffer told Politico. Witnesses who've seen the Bondi clip are terrified of becoming the next viral moment. So they're noticeably more forthcoming with her than with other members. The impact extended to her Texas district, where Crockett's approval ratings rose significantly following the hearing. Local businesses began displaying "Keep Calm" and Crockett on signs, a grassroots show of support that crossed partisan lines. Even voters who disagreed with her politics expressed appreciation for her professional approach. "I don't vote Democratic," a small business owner told the Dallas Morning News, "but I respect how she handled herself. She didn't make it personal or emotional. She just laid out the facts and let them speak for themselves. We could use more of that in politics, regardless of party." For Pam Bondi, the aftermath had proven far more challenging. The initial viral moment had evolved into a sustained scrutiny of her post-govern consulting work, with several news organizations filing public records, requests to examine her firm's relationships with contractors receiving state funds. The Florida Ethics Commission announced it was reviewing complaints regarding potential conflicts of interest in her consulting practice. While the commission emphasized this was standard procedure following formal complaints, the announcement generated another round of negative headlines. Professionally, the impact was immediate. 3 organizations canceled speaking engagements, citing scheduling conflicts but privately acknowledging they wanted to avoid association with the controversy. A planned book deal about her experiences in law enforcement was reportedly put on hold by the publisher. More damaging were the internal consequences within Republican circles. Sources close to several campaigns revealed that Bondi, previously a sought-after surrogate and advisor, had received significantly fewer requests for involvement since the hearing. Asterisk, the calculation is simple. explained a Republican strategist, speaking anonymously. Why risk having your candidate associated with someone who's now famous for losing their composure on camera? There are plenty of effective surrogates who don't bring that baggage. Bondi's attempts to counter the narrative largely failed to gain traction. Her appearance on a friendly cable news program had generated additional criticism when she, again, became visibly angry while discussing Crockett, reinforcing rather than countering the impression from the hearing. She's making the same mistake twice, observed a communications expert. Responding emotionally to criticism about being too emotional just deepens the problem. It's Communications 101. 10 days after the hearing, Bondi released a statement announcing she was temporarily stepping back from public appearances to focus on client work, effectively acknowledging the damage to her public profile. Political observers noted this represented a significant career setback for someone who had been positioning herself for potential future campaigns or appointments. Beyond the individual consequences for both women, the incident had sparked a broader conversation about communication styles and politics. Several campaign training organizations reported incorporating the exchange into their programs, using it to demonstrate effective and ineffective approaches to high-pressure situations. We're calling it the Crockett contrast, explained the director of a bipartisan campaign school. We show the clip and ask which of these approaches builds credibility with viewers. The answer transcends party lines. Calm, factual responses almost always outperform emotional outbursts regardless of the substance of the argument. This assessment was reinforced by polling data showing that among independent voters often the deciding factor in close elections, Crockett's approach was preferred by a 4-to-1 margin over Bondi, even among those who ideologically aligned more closely with Bondi's positions. Media training consultants reported a surge in requests for sessions focused on maintaining composure under pressure, with several specifically referencing the Crockett-Bondi exchange as a case study they wanted to learn from. We've had clients from both parties, as well as corporate executives and public relations professionals, ask us to help them develop what they're calling CrockettLevel.com, noted a prominent communications coach. It's rare for a single exchange to so clearly demonstrate the effectiveness of one approach over another. As the immediate story began to fade from headlines, its lasting impact was becoming clear. Beyond the political fortunes of the two women involved, the exchange had provided a powerful reminder about effective communication in an era of constant recording and viral sharing. In Crockett's measured response to provocation, many saw a potential path forward from the shouting matches that had come to dominate American politics, a demonstration that effectiveness and civility need not be mutually exclusive, and that, in fact, they often reinforce each other. Whether this lesson would lead to lasting changes in political discourse remained to be seen. But for the millions who had watched and shared the exchange, the contrast between Bondi's fury and Crockett's composure had provided a clear example of which approach ultimately proves more persuasive in the court of public opinion. 1 month after the congressional hearing that catapulted her into the national spotlight, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium of her district office in Dallas, addressing a room packed with constituents and media. The turnout for her monthly town hall had quadrupled since the viral exchange with Pam Bondi, requiring a move to a larger venue to accommodate the interest. "I want to begin by thanking everyone for coming today," Crockett said, her voice carrying the same measured confidence she displayed during the hearing. "While I appreciate the attention recent events have brought to our work, what matters most is what we do with that attention." The crowd listened attentively as she pivoted from the viral moment to substantive policy discussions, outlining her legislative priorities and the progress of the Transparency in Public Service Act, which had gained significant bipartisan support in the weeks following the hearing. What had begun as a response to one specific exchange had evolved into meaningful, legislation with the potential for lasting impact. This bill isn't about any individual encounter, she explained. It's about establishing clear standards so that public service remains focused on the public, not on future private gain. And I'm pleased to report that colleagues from both parties recognize the value in these common sense, transparency measures. Indeed, the bill had attracted co-sponsors from across the political spectrum, with several Republican representatives joining as early supporters. Political analysts noted this represented a rare achievement for a freshman representative, particularly in the current polarized environment. Crockett has managed something remarkable, a congressional scholar told the Washington Post. She's leveraged a viral moment not for personal celebrity, but to advance substantive legislation. And she's done it in a way that makes it difficult for even partisan opponents to dismiss the underlying issues. This focus on substance over spectacle had become Crockett's defining characteristic in the weeks following the hearing. While countless media outlets had requested interviews focusing on the confrontation with Bondi, she had consistently redirected conversations toward policy matters and legislative goals. "I'm here to work, not to relive a single exchange," she told a reporter who pressed for details about her reaction to Bondi's outburst. The American people deserve representatives focused on solutions, not sound bites. This approach had only enhanced her growing reputation as a serious legislator rather than a momentary social media sensation. Committee chairs increasingly called on her during important hearings, recognizing her ability to cut through rhetoric and focus on factual details. Colleagues sought her input on messaging strategies, particularly for contentious issues requiring precise communication. Most significantly, Crockett had begun mentoring other freshman representatives, sharing techniques for effective oversight and questioning. A small group now gathered regularly in her office to practice maintaining composure during confrontational scenarios and preparing thoroughly for committee appearances. "What we saw in that hearing room wasn't just good instinct," explained a fellow representative who had joined these sessions. "It was the result of careful preparation and a deliberate communication strategy." Jasmine is teaching us that effectiveness comes from substance and delivery working together. For Pam Bondi, the month following the hearing had brought a different trajectory. After her initial attempts to counter the narrative failed to gain traction, she had largely withdrawn from public view, canceling most media appearances and declining comment on the ongoing investigations into her consulting work. The Florida Ethics Commission's preliminary review had proceeded with investigators requesting additional documents related to the pandemic fund reallocation. While no findings had been announced, the continued scrutiny represented a significant professional challenge for someone who had built her reputation on prosecutorial ethics. Bondi's consulting firm had reportedly lost several clients in the weeks following the hearing, with sources indicating that companies were concerned about potential association with the controversy. Her name had been quietly removed from several Republican fundraising events, where she had previously been advertised as a featured speaker. Most tellingly, profiles of Bondi in conservative media had shifted noticeably in tone, where previous coverage had positioned her as a rising star and potential candidate for future office. Recent articles described her as focusing on private sector work and taking a step back from political activities. Subtle but significant indications of diminished standing. "The shelf life of political damage can be short," noted a Republican strategist. "But when you create your own negative defining moment on camera, it's harder to overcome, especially when it reinforces existing concerns about temperament and judgment." For both women, the contrasting aftermath of their encounter reflected broader truths about modern political communication. In an era of constant recording and instant sharing, a single exchange could define public perception far beyond its immediate context. How public figures responded in moments of pressure increasingly shaped their long-term effectiveness and credibility. The lesson hadn't been lost on political operatives across the spectrum. Campaign managers reported incorporating what many now call the Crockett Rule into their candidate training. When provoked, pause, maintain composure, and respond with facts rather than matching emotion. We're literally showing the side-by-side video in our prep sessions, admitted a consultant working with several congressional campaigns. One approach works, one doesn't, and the evidence is right there in the view counts and public reaction. Beyond political circles. The exchange had sparked conversations in workplaces, classrooms, and homes about effective communication during conflict. Business schools added the clip to negotiation courses. Debate coaches referenced it when teaching students how to maintain composure under pressure. Parents showed it to children as an example of responding to provocation without escalating tension. As Crockett concluded her town hall meeting, a constituent rose to ask the question many still wondered. "Congresswoman, how did you stay so calm when she was yelling at you? Weren't you angry too?" Crockett smiled slightly before responding. "Of course, I felt emotion in that moment. But I reminded myself of something my grandmother always told me: when someone raises their voice, lower yours. Make them meet you at reason. Don't meet them at rage." She paused, considering her next words carefully. In that hearing room, I wasn't just representing myself. I was representing my district, my state, and everyone who believes our political system can function with dignity and respect, even amid disagreement. Getting drawn into a shouting match wouldn't have served any of those people. The room erupted in applause, not the partisan cheering of a campaign rally, but the appreciative response of citizens who, regardless of political affiliation, recognize the value of dignity in public discourse. As the applause faded, Crockett offered a final thought that captured the lasting significance of what had begun as a routine committee hearing and evolved into a cultural touchstone. "The volume of our voices has never determined the value of our arguments," she said. "Facts spoken calmly will always carry further than accusations shouted in anger." That's not just a lesson for politics. It's a lesson for life. The sentiment resonated far beyond the town hall, echoing the conclusion many had drawn from the viral exchange. In a political environment often defined by its heat rather than its light, effectiveness ultimately comes not from who shouts loudest, but from who speaks most clearly and who remains steady when others lose their composure. And in that simple truth lay the reason why, a month after their confrontation, Jasmine Crockett continued to rise while Pam Bondi struggled to regain her footing. A vivid illustration that in the court of public opinion, how we make our case often matters just as much as what we're arguing for. If you found this analysis of the Bondi-Crockett confrontation revealing, make sure to hit like and subscribe now. We bring you the deepest insights into political showdowns that the mainstream media misses. Our next video will explore how Crockett's techniques can be applied in everyday conflicts and what Bondi could have done differently to maintain her credibility. Subscribe now so you don't miss these exclusive political breakdowns that help you understand what's really happening in Washington.